Pablo, thanks for joining me on this nice crisp morning in Southern Cal.
Definitely, thank you.
Yeah, this is always a great conversation for me because I got the privilege of working with you at Verb. I think I was employee number 7. You were probably employee number 2, I think, probably.
Something like that,
right?
yeah.
And you've, just for our viewers, you came out of SRI and had really evaluated and been part of some pretty profound surgical robotic platforms. And then you led a major initiative, basically, for Verb Surgical, the J&J and Google effort on the robot that you and I had a couple years with. It was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot about robotics because of you. Now you're looking at the market, right? You're a free agent, so to speak.
Yep.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts about the state of large format robotics today? Because you obviously looked at the competitive landscape at Verb. You know, we've got CMR, we've got, and you don't have to give me names in particular. We've got Hugo, we've got Verb, we've got Intuitive, we've got all the others. As of early 2023, what's your thoughts on the state of robotics?
Well, when my hair was not as white, and a few years earlier.
At least yours is white.
That's right. Well, it's not all there too, but I would have thought that we would have platforms already competing in a serious way with Intuitive. It's surprising that although there's a lot of initiatives out there, there's no initiative that really has gained serious traction. And that speaks for how challenging the problem is to tackle, because there's so many aspects of it, not only related to the robotic technology, but how to optimize it to fit it into the workflow and cover all the range of tools and specialties and procedures, and so many details. So my observation on this is that Intuitive still does not have a serious competitor, at least on the robotic platform itself. Maybe other competitors start emerging in the space around the robot, which is the digital space and visualization and decision making, but nobody's close to having an ecosystem such as the one from Intuitive.
You've been tuned into that market for a long time, and is that because that the expectations and the bar are higher? You know, Intuitive got a chance to do it almost 20 years ago with a different FDA perspective on it, and now when people say it's just as good as Intuitive, I'm like, well, then why would I not just buy Intuitive? So do you think it's a more stringent, higher expectation market, or do you just think that Intuitive cracked it and figured out how to do it?
Well, I think it's just a more complex problem than people appreciate it. I'm confident that that a lot of the initiatives will come to fruition, and there will be competition. It's just a tougher nut to crack, and across the industry, maybe people underestimated the amount of effort and know-how that it was going to require to actually get to that level. But still, no question that the bar keeps moving, and the more time that evolves, then the further the technology gets and the harder it is to catch up. So I think it's just a complex problem.
Do you think that the new focus is less so on the mechanical advantages of robotics? As we go back to 2014, 15, when we were Warren Robotics and then Verb Surgical, and now it seems a lot of these robotic systems are indexing towards workflow, guidance for the clinician, not as much as the dexterity or the augmentation of the movement.
Absolutely. I think right now the value that and the area of focus a lot of these platforms start really looking into is that whole ecosystem. around the dexterity. It's obviously, surgery is much more than just the dexterity and the surgical event, and looking at that piece of equipment in the context of the whole therapy and the whole journey for the therapy in the hospital, was the preoperative, intraoperative, and postoperative in a more holistic way, is really the direction that you see a lot of the technology evolving towards. And so that's a little bit what we had anticipated back at Verb, and what is happening now, which is that it really is much more about how all the pieces tie together and make the whole therapy more cost-effective, more efficient, improve the quality. And there's just a lot of pieces that come into play. An ecosystem like a robotic platform, now the value that it brings is that everything that happens during the operation basically goes through one single computer. Every tool that is changed, every action. You're still missing some of the ancillary operations of the team, but as soon as you bring that together, it's a pretty solid foundation to kind of, construct a bigger picture of all the pieces that go into that operation, which is a lot, and which is really the cause for inefficiencies in the hospital. It's not just the operation, but it's how you prepare the operation, how the nurses coordinate the flow of patients, how anesthesia comes into play. There's so many pieces into it. So I think we will see an evolution towards a true digital operation, where you'll be able to not only plan it better, but execute it better and react better to problems, or even anticipate problems a lot more effectively.
You had an interesting statement before we sat down about why digital maybe hasn't gotten the traction that everybody romantically had hoped. Mm-hmm. And I think it's more the investors, but you had a very succinct sort of thought on that. Would you share that?
Sure. I think, the space of digital, surgery is a very complex space, because every patient is different. Every specialty is different. There's a lot of both complexity and customization, and so it's no coincidence that the knowledge for those procedures basically exists in the heads of the specialists, certain hospitals, and it's not uniform across the board. There's a lot of science that still needs to be developed in order to be able to garner that knowledge, extract the best practices, standardize it, reduce variability, and so on. And I think a lot of the digital solutions out there, they're a little bit ahead of the science.
I mean, the business hopes.
The business hopes. So yes, the ideas are all good. We all want to reduce the variability of procedures. We all want to increase the quality. But one size does not fit all. And it does feel that a lot of the solutions out there, they're more of a technology push, and they're not really in sync with the science. And right now, unless you're more in sync with surgical science and the academic centers and the surgeons, and they really find it meaningful, it's going to be difficult for those technologies to be adopted. They feel a little bit simplistic in the way that they're really offering the solution to the market.
The digital solution. So with that, if we were to look at, in the M&M session yesterday, mm-hmm. there was a talk about staying focused, right? Staying focused, boil one cup of water, not the ocean at a time. Would it be a reasonable thesis then to go after one specific procedure mm-hmm. as a beta, and then fully exhaust the exploration of that procedure, and then use that as a template moving forward for best of the rules of engagement? What are the standards? Because I think you said this to me a year or two ago, is there's no agreed upon language, there's no standards in data.
Yeah, the conundrum in this space is that it's both deep and wide. But unless you go deep, you're never going to get wide, because you stay basically too much on the surface, so you're not really adding value. So you're right, taking a procedure, and diving into the complexities and the nuances of that procedure and the variety and the ways in which people approach it, and working to really get to a point where this is a tool that somebody would not hesitate, well, it would be silly not to use because it adds so much value to the procedure. Then you can start thinking about how to scale it. But I have been developing those tools, and the conundrum is that, an ideal software tool is one that applies to as many things as possible. So customization goes against basically the commercial opportunity for that, and that's why there's tension on it. I just don't think that going wide too soon is going to be successful. And I think in the M&M session, a lot of the speakers or at least I remember a couple of the speakers were reflecting on what went wrong. And part of what went wrong is that they basically try to think too broad, too early, instead of just focusing on where they saw the maximum value and letting the value organically evolve and the product evolve with it, and then think of applying it. So I think it is a good analogy that you brought there.
And it's interesting, as you were sharing that thought, I thought back, and you know what drove most of those, if you think back about the M&M session, and it's also what's driving the disrespect given to data, is the egos of either the founder or the egos of the leadership that needs to make money. They think right away on digital.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let it percolate, let it get legs. But the one thing that ruins all technology is marketing. Right? Because it makes promises to the outside world, it makes promises to the venture people. The science, as you said, still needs to be galvanized and really thought through. But they get out here and create false expectations, and then us poor engineers back here suffer.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. Obviously, you need a market, otherwise you wouldn't have investors. Investing into solutions that are going to be useful. But sometimes I think our eyes get a bit too wide, because the truth is there is an enormous opportunity. But I always remember this futurologist back in the 70s, we overestimate these technologies in the short term. We underestimate them in the long term. And I think that's what's happening a little bit here. There's no question that these technologies are going to completely revolutionize the way that we do healthcare. I think I liked his presentation yesterday, where he was, touching into anything from pre-authorization for insurance, using natural language to solve a lot of the tasks, to computer vision in the OR. There's no question it's going to be revolutionized, but it's not going to happen next year or the year after. And if you think you're going to make money within 3 years, maybe, but it's not going to be like a ton of money. So you got to be here for the long term. And to be here for the long term, you have to grow organically. It's a better strategy than go big too soon.
You and I have talked about, you've always been, when I was with you in the Verb days, you always were keyed in on these new sensor developments, these great ways to pick up information and data. Where do you see sensors, the cost of sensors dropping, the fidelity of the signal becoming better and better all the time? Do you think that onboard sensors on classic analog devices, and maybe even directed at managing and treating chronic disease, is really the on-ramp potentially to a legit digital payback?
Absolutely, and I think it's really so in addition to sensors becoming more ubiquitous and cheaper and so on, it's really all the technologies that are able to handle the information that has been really the unlocking key for this. Right now, whether it's integrating sensors, anything you do in the body, it's an opportunity to learn about the body. And we know that every body is different, every disease is different. And so if you go and do an operation in somebody who is, let's say, diabetic, and you're doing, some colon resection or, any kind of, surgical abdominal surgery, it's an opportunity to learn about tissue, about the way the tools interact. It's a good opportunity to learn about the healing process and to find out what are the optimum things that you can do during the surgery that can help in the patient. And so sensors is what allows you to do that. And I think the technologies that are available right now is basically take all those streams of sensors, which have overwhelming amount of data, and really filter them out to extract things that are meaningful. And not only that, you'll have sensors on the surgeon, you'll have sensors on the patient, you'll have sensors on the nurses, you'll have camera in the OR. So linking all those things will now provide value to the stakeholders, to the clinical team, how to do things better. On the patient, on how to optimize their journey. To the hospital, and how to increase efficiency. And it's only when you converge all these streams that you really start extracting the value. So you're right, I think sensors, it's a key, basically, enabler for a lot of these technologies to flourish.
What are you going to be watching for over the next couple of years on form factors on robotics? We seem to have more and more of these smaller form factors coming out, whether it's Moon, whether it's distal motion, whether it's virtual incision, versus the larger formats like a Hugo or Verb eventually, CMR, Intuitive. Thoughts in those areas?
Yeah, it's a perennial. We want to make it really small. On the other hand, the laws of physics force you to. I think there's no question there's opportunities to make a lot of these platforms, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily the size. You really have to think of it in terms of workflow. What enables a better and more agile workflow? And sometimes it's a small size, but sometimes it's not. Actually, having something small can be more cumbersome to install, and can, be actually worse for the workflow of something big. So I think you're going to see a lot of effort put into things that flow better with a workflow, that enable the procedure. So now a robotic procedure is not necessarily longer than a laparoscopic procedure. Obviously, the gold standard is to pick up a tool on the bench and just use it, right? That's kind of like, how do we get a robot to compete with that? But I think the real part of the reason that a lot of these platforms have not evolved is because the tool and the instrumentation have remained the same.
You're talking about the end effector?
The end effectors have remained pretty much the same. I mean, I was looking at yesterday one of the presentations where they're showing some complications with a robotic platform doing a dissection on the esophagus. We're still in use a monopolar device, which is used, for decades, right? Until you change the instrumentation, it's hard to change the form factor. And I do think there is a lot of opportunity to change the instrumentation as well as changing the visualization. I think if I'd be watching for something, I'd be watching for something like that over the next few years to really revolutionize the way that we interact with
vision
tissue.
systems and the end effector of the
Yes.
tool versus the robot itself versus the digital side.
The robot itself is just an instrument to hold those things.
Right.
If those things require forces, then you're going to need, a certain solution for it.
I think I hear what you're going.
If those instruments work in a different way, or are able to do things that you can't do, or don't impose the same
force requirements,
force and speed and motion requirements as others, then it opens up all of a sudden. So I think my only observation here is that the instruments remain the same, and they're not ideal. And there's a lot of unmet needs that a change in instrumentation could circumvent.
You just put a smile on my face because I haven't looked at robotics that way before. Right, so let's go to the point of where we're trying to affect something.
That's the most important
back.
part of the robot, the end effector and the camera. Yeah.
Huh. All right. You just stoked something. I appreciate that. Anything else we should be talking about before we finish up? What's Pablo going to be doing the next couple months, years?
Something interesting.
So are you going to go back into robotics, or do you think you're going to go into digital, on board, commercial products, just in general?
I really think that digital technologies have an enormous potential for impact in improving healthcare. And they have a potential for impact in practical ways and in timelines that are not as constrained as a big hardware platform. So I've become really interested in that space. And that's the space that I'm going to keep on pushing to see through real useful implementations that can make a difference for surgeons, can make a difference for patients, and can really, start addressing some of the fundamental issues that we have in the healthcare system, which is inherently costly, inefficient, and with a very uncontrolled. I mean, I'm exaggerating. There's a lot of room for improvement in quality and efficiency and cost, and especially in the U.S. With respect to the money that we spend versus what we get, it's just not proportionate. So I think the digital technologies will have a tremendous opportunity, and that's the area that I'm interested in pushing further.
Well, as always, my friend, I love our conversations. Always leaves me thinking and a little smarter.
Likewise.
I'm Joe Mullings, SDTS and Sagis, the next big thing. Be well.